Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching The World Report. Let's first take a look at our top stories. US President Donald Trump says it is up to Europe to provide security guarantees for Ukraine ahead of a meeting with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is to head to the States to sign a mineral deal which currently excludes Washington's guarantee of support. Hamas has handed over the bodies of 4 deceased hostages in exchange for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. This signals the final exchange in the first phase of the Gaza ceasefire deal, with negotiations on the second phase yet to start as planned. Donald Trump holds his first cabinet meeting at the White House with an extended question and answer session, speaking alongside his cabinet and Elon Musk. Topics included immigration, Doge's government cuts and the economy. Meanwhile, Trump has continued his tariff threats, including a potential 25% duty on EU imports. Meanwhile, Trump says tariffs against Mexico and Canada will go ahead despite border efforts from those nations relating to immigration and the drug trade. In the latest developments from the Democratic Republic of Congo, ICC Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan said international courts have failed to stop 3 decades of atrocities in the conflict-torn eastern DRC. Later, he added that DRC needs a special tribunal to deal with the ongoing atrocities. Meanwhile, the UK has suspended all aid to Rwanda, causing a wave of concern in its citizens. This sudden suspension of aid has indirectly been in favour of M23 rebels, increasing the chances of hostility. Joining us first to discuss this topic, we're joined by Dr. Charles Sinkala, who's an international relations consultant who is joining us from Cape Town. Thank you, Dr. Sinkala, for joining us. The warnings are there from the ICC. The geopolitical warnings and concern over this issue are, of course, rising. But what, in your opinion, needs to be done in the short term to stop the humanitarian crises and the deaths that we're seeing?
Yes, it is quite important. Thank you very much for having me. It is quite important to look at the aspects of the impact in terms of the legal jurisdiction. And the international law has specified in terms of the United Nations that peace must be, portrayed to an extent that it does not violate any human rights.
Thank you, Dr. Sinkala, for that. Also, sticking with the South African sort of aspect of this, there are troops, of course. We know that there are troops that have been in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but 127 of those are set to be evacuated from the front lines. What impact could this have, and where else will troops come from to try and keep the peace in the region?
The de-escalation of military support in DRC will actually help in the healing process, as in the past 60 years, we have seen the rise in escalation of military support to DRC without any reason or room for the stop to the violence and the conflicts, which started year back in 1961 when the Patrice Emery Lumumba was eliminated and replaced by Mobutu Sese Seko Kumbendo Ngwazambanga as the president of that country, who presided over that nation at the expense of the Congolese. And we also saw subsequent to that in 1996, 1997, the Congo War, when actually the president of DRC, Laurent Kabila, was killed, and and many other aspects of escalation. There is also about 150 military support that has been in DRC for over this period, notwithstanding the fact of the celebrities. We've always been talking about the M23 who has actually been identified, but we've got a lot of mercenaries, we've got the United Nations peacekeeping missions, and as well as the regional organizations.
Yes, also joining us to discuss the ever-evolving situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo is Shyam Batra, who is an international affairs expert joining us from London. Thank you very much for your time. we need to look at the UK and their role in this. Of course, the Rwanda deal that was providing money to the Rwandan government for the proposed deportation of migrants has seen hundreds of millions of pounds travel to the African nation. Keir Starmer saying that funding and any funding to Rwanda will stop. But is the impact there a responsibility that the UK should look at amongst other nations at how this situation has sort of got to the position that it is in?
Thanks for having me. I have a slight cough, so do forgive me. I think the Rwanda deal was a joke. It was a complete, utter joke. It never got off the ground, even though there was talk of the planes leaving and everything else. And why would people want to go there, with all due respect? But there was no real agreement set up in place. So, I mean, in terms of, I think Starmer said that he was going to continue it, but he never did. But the problem lies more deeply, as your colleague said, about the M23 rebels, who are gaining a lot of momentum at the moment in the country. I think they've taken another city, haven't they, in the last day or so. And they're moving ahead. But the problem is there's no like policing as such. There's no military, there's no policing. And this goes back to Trump's words about having put away money from governments for this type of problem that may happen in the future, especially with Africa the way it is. It is not policed or run in a way. I mean, I can only see that the Rwanda story. I mean, I think that the M23 rebels are making huge advancement and they may take over, who knows? But it has to stop. Now, America is not involving itself. The UK has just stopped aid, suspension of all aid and punitive, Rwanda says. So because the Rwandan scheme never really got off the ground, it doesn't solve matters if there is a war going on as well, you know. And you're all close countries, but I always say it's better to negotiate than it is to continue with this sort of nonsense. You know, the rebels are making headway. Who is talking about that at the moment? And who is stopping it? South Africa's lost some people. They've all disappeared. How does Congo defend itself is the question. And how big is the army to fight these rebels?
Yes, staying with you, Shyam, of course there have been incidents of infighting between government-backed forces, but it seems that there needs to be, as you've mentioned already, a serious international effort to stop this. But where is that going to come from? You've mentioned already the US, of course, with their aid policies. Sir Keir Starmer's mentioned as well that aid will stop. But with the humanitarian crisis, we're seeing children being killed, the rape of children and women across the region, not just from M23 and rebel forces, also from fighters on the side of the DRC government. So the situation is dire, the humanitarian situation is getting worse day by day. Whose responsibility is it to make sure this stops?
Well, you see, Africa as a continent has 54 countries. If the Africans are not compiling together and helping when something like this happens, because Africa's always been a continent that no one really looks at. When the COVID happened, they'd hardly got hit. But of human aid, etc., humanitarian aid. I mean, I've read, obviously, rape has taken place and children disappearing and all this other stuff. Again, this is what happens in a war. But you've got to stop it. You've got to start negotiations from day one. I mean, if Zelensky started negotiations from day one with Putin, we wouldn't be here 3 years later, because he ran everywhere and said, oh, I need money, I want to fight these people, I want to do this, I want to do that. But you need manpower, strength. I mean, in our country, probably like most countries, and I'm not sure about Africa, we have these foot soldiers that have been placed in hotels everywhere, across our whole country. And we don't even know if they're going to turn on us, but they're here. They're in India, they're in everywhere else, and I don't know if they're in Africa. So if you're going to start a war, then you've got to finish it. But the idea is to not even go down that road. I'm happy to do negotiations. If anybody wants me from the Congo Republic, or sorry, from the DRC, to talk. and to try and battle this out, because you need to talk about things. If you don't, it's a game over.
Dr. Sinkala, looking at those talks and looking at some African unity, is that something that you think is a viable option? And if so, who's going to need to take charge of those talks to make sure that a real peace or some form of peace is forged, meaning that there is no death and destruction and humanitarian crises like we're seeing?
I think he's disappeared, has he?
I'll throw that question to you, please, Sham. We seem to have lost there. So, which African nation? Yes, which African nation do you think needs to take the mantle here and really make sure that there is unity across those more than 50 nations, as you've already mentioned?
I think we've got to reach out to the 54 nations and say to them, I mean, Nigeria is one of them to start. And Congo is a mineral war. This is the only reason why the rebels are jumping, because they know they can get the minerals. This is always about land, etc. So in between all of that. But I think that we need to get somebody like South Africa, Nigeria, and maybe a couple of other big ones to come on board and to negotiate this war down. And send troops over there as peacekeeping troops for the moment. The United Nations are clearly not going to help. It's inevitable that there needs to be a peacekeeping mission. This just can't carry on. Destruction and killing innocent children. I made a charter for the UN, which never even got anywhere, I don't think, about women and children must always be evacuated from a country and put into a safe place, given money, given housing, and they're safe. And if there's a war to take place, then so be it. But at least the women are not damaged or the children are not trafficked and other stuff. But these are the small things. It's called common sense. But governments, officials, prime ministers, presidents do not even tackle common sense. And this is what frustrates me here in my country, when we've got a government that nobody wants and they're doing what they want to do, when democratically we voted for them and said, do this for us. They work for us, we don't work for them. But when you've got Africa, it's a different breed, because no one's really tackled Africa, and there needs to be a strong community build. All the countries. I mean, imagine the business that they could do between each other instead of fighting wars. I mean, this is a mineral war, and it's going to continue till they take what they want. And they'll take power at the same time, and the world is watching.
Absolutely, the world is watching, and we will of course bring you all the latest as it happens. But thank you, Sham Batra, and also thank you, Dr. Sinkala, for joining us. We now move on, and US President Donald Trump has pulled security guarantees for Ukraine. This comes ahead of his meeting with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer today. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky continues his urge for US support as he is set to meet Trump on Friday. Here is the detailed report.
The dynamics in the potential truce between Russia and Ukraine are developing drastically. In recent updates, dozens of dignitaries walked out of Russia's speech to the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva in support of Ukraine. The delegates, including the ambassadors of France, Germany and Britain, demanded a seat for Ukraine on the negotiations table and an enduring peace, in line with the UN Charter. Speaking of support for Ukraine, British Prime Minister has arrived in Washington to meet with US President Donald Trump. Ahead of meeting Starmer, Trump has pulled back support for Ukraine.
Well, I'm not going to make security guarantees beyond very much. We're going to have Europe do that, because it's in, we're talking about Europe as their next door neighbor. But we're going to make sure everything goes well.
This comes ahead of the arrival of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in US on Friday to sign the key minerals deal. Zelensky, however, keeps his hopes high for US support.
Зустрінусь з президентом Трампом. Для мене і всіх нас у світі важливо, щоб допомога Америки не була зупинена. Сила потрібна на шляху до миру.
From the battleground, Seoul has reported that North Korea has deployed additional troops to Russia, but the scale of the contingent was not immediately known. With these major developments, the future of the war remains at stake. Bureau Report, NewsX.
Let's now take a look at the latest news from the world of business. Bitcoin has fallen below $85,000 as uncertainty looms over US trade policies weighed in on market sentiment. US President Donald Trump today suggested that the pending tariffs on Canada and Mexico could take effect on April the 2nd. However, the White House later clarified that the original March the 2nd deadline remains. Markets reacted swiftly, with US Treasury yields rising and global crypto market cap facing sharp declines. Chip-making giant Nvidia has doubled its profits in 2024, exceeding Wall Street projections. The company recorded a quarterly revenue of approximately $39 billion. On Wednesday, the company's shares dipped just over 1% in after-hours trading, but rebounded 2.7% within 30 minutes of the earnings report. Nvidia expects sales to grow to $43 billion in the current quarter. YouTube creator Mr. Beast is aiming to raise hundreds of millions of dollars to expand his business. The funding round would value his company at around $5 billion. The company owns several businesses, including Mr. Beast's chocolate brand Feastables and the snack company Lunchly and his video production company. Discussions are still in the early stages, with uncertainty on who will invest. Nissan is likely to unveil a shake-up in their leadership on March the 12th. This comes after 2 consecutive weak quarters and failed merger talks with Honda. The $60 billion deal ultimately ended due to Honda's bid to make Nissan a subsidiary. According to reports, CEO Makoto Uchida is expecting to retain his position. Nissan's directors are exploring potential successors. However, no immediate leadership change is expected. Oil prices have gone up for the first time in 3 days. Brent crude oil is now at nearly $72 and West Texas crude oil is at around $68 per barrel. The rise comes after US President Donald Trump cancelled Chevron's license to export oil from Venezuela, cutting off 240,000 barrels per day. The market had slumped earlier due to rising US fuel inventories and hopes for a potential peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. Rising tensions in the Taiwan Strait as Taiwan detects a record 45 Chinese aircraft and 14 warships near its territory. Taipei condemns China's military drills and accuses Beijing of dangerous provocations, urging global attention to regional security. Let's take a look in this report.
Tensions escalate in the Taiwan Strait as Taiwan reports detecting 45 Chinese aircraft near the island, the highest number recorded this year. In the past 24 hours, Taiwan's defense ministry also reported the presence of 14 Chinese warships near its territory, marking a sharp increase in military activity.
我们此前已经介绍过在有关问题上的立场，我想在这里再次强调，中方愿在相互尊重、平等相待的基础上，发展同库克群岛等太平洋岛国的友好合作关系，促进共同发展。
This surge follows China's recent combat drill and live-fire exercises just 40 nautical miles off Taiwan's southern coast, moves Taipei condemned as dangerous provocations. In response, Taiwan deployed its own military forces to monitor and respond to what it calls repeated violations of international norms. Taiwan's presidential office issued a strong condemnation of Beijing's actions, calling them blatant provocations against regional peace and stability. Amid rising tensions, Taiwan's foreign ministry urged the global community to closely monitor security in the Taiwan Strait. Adding to the strain, Taiwan seized a Chinese crude cargo ship suspected of cutting a subsea telecom cable, fueling fears over threats to critical infrastructure. Bureau Report, NewsX.
We'll now take a look at the latest updates from across the continent of Europe. A French court has handed down a life sentence to Brahim Aswayi for the 2020 terrorist attack at Nice's Notre Dame Basilica. The Tunisian man has been found guilty of the murder of Nadine de Villers, Barreto Silva and Vincent López. The 25-year-old has admitted the attack was revenge for the deaths of Muslims in the West. The judge stated that he is an extremely dangerous man who presents a high risk of reoffending. Ukraine's economy has the potential to expand by 5% next year, according to a recent prediction by the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Over the past 3 years, the EBRD has invested $6.2 billion in Ukrainian projects. The chief economist of the EBRD, Yavorchich, has pointed out that the success of reconstruction depends on stable peace. Germany has seen a debate ignite over gender representation in politics after the recent election. A social media image has sparked controversy showing Friedrich Merz and his all-male transition team. Critics have questioned whether Merz can bridge the gender gap. Meanwhile, the Green Party's co-leader has remarked on the lack of diversity, comparing the team to the Syrian government. The EU has devised a plan to save €2.5 trillion over the next 15 years by lowering national taxes on electricity. This initiative comes as 47 million people in EU member states have struggled with energy poverty. Businesses have been facing challenges competing with the US and China due to high energy costs. Meanwhile, the EU Commissioner for Energy and Housing stated that the measures will save around €45 billion in Europe. They are aiming for €130 billion a year by 2030. The Economist Intelligence Unit has released its latest democracy index, revealing that global democracy has weakened following a year of worldwide elections. The report has indicated a continued trend of democratic malaise. The sharpest decline has been observed in government functioning and electoral processes. Meanwhile, Portugal has been upgraded to a full democracy, but France has slipped into the flawed category. The Catalan president, Salvador Illa, has fought for Catalan and Galician to gain recognition as official EU languages in Brussels. Catalan is spoken by around 10 million people in Spain, Andorra, France and Italy. Illa says that official status would affirm that citizens from Catalonia, Galicia and the Basque Country belong to Europe. In a significant development, Hamas has handed over the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages taken during the October 7th attacks. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has shared a controversial AI-generated video depicting his vision for the future of Gaza. Here is more on the latest developments.
Hamas has handed over what it claims are the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages, Shlomo Mansour, Ohad Yahalomi, Tashi Aidan and Itzik Elgarat, taken during the October 7th attacks. DNA testing is currently underway to confirm their identities. In return, Israel has begun releasing over 600 Palestinian prisoners, with dozens already arriving in the West Bank and Gaza to jubilant crowds. This marks the final exchange of the first phase of the ceasefire agreement.
هي لحظات عز، لحظات نصر، لحظات فخر، لحظات شرف، لحظات أمي، لحظات هذه بتمناها لكل بيت فلسطيني، بتمنى كل بيت فلسطيني عنده أسير يصل لهي المرحلة، وبإذن العالمين كل بيوتنا اللي عندهم أسرة بيض السجون تتبيض وروح لأهلهم يا رب العالمين. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الحمد لله، أما بنعمة ربك فحدث.
The handover of these bodies has been done privately, unlike previous exchanges that were publicly televised. Israel had previously accused Hamas of orchestrating humiliating handover ceremonies, which delayed the recent prisoner release. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has shared an AI-generated video depicting his vision for Gaza's future. The 30-second clip, posted on Truth Social, shows a post-conflict Gaza transformed into a sunny resort, featuring a giant golden statue of Trump and bizarre scenes like Hamas terrorists dancing in bikinis on the beach. The video has sparked reactions for its surreal portrayal of the region's future. Bureau Report, NewsX.
We'll now take a look at the latest updates from across North America. The Houston-based company Intuitive Machines has launched its Athena lander aboard with the aim of landing on the moon. Athena will travel on a SpaceX Falcon 9 from NASA's Kennedy Space Center. If successful, it will land on March the 6th on the moon's largest mountain, Mons Mouton. This would be the closest ever landing to the moon's south pole. Last year, the company made history as the first private firm to land on the moon, but its Odysseus lander tipped over upon touchdown. This time, key upgrades aim for a perfect landing. A child has died after the worst measles outbreak in Texas in nearly 30 years. The child, who was not vaccinated, had been hospitalised and passed away on Tuesday night. So far, 124 cases have been reported across 9 Texas counties. Health officials warn the outbreak is serious, with doctors stressing that measles is highly contagious but preventable with vaccines. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is monitoring the situation, but Texas health officials are leading the response with support from the federal government. Canada's broadcast regulator is set to impose a fee on Google starting on April the 1st. The levy aims to recover costs from tech giants like Google to compensate media outlets for news links shared on their platforms. Google argues it should be exempt from Canada's new fee, citing voluntary deals with media and calling it unfair to bear the full cost. Despite this, regulators are moving forward. The move comes as President Trump threatens tariffs on Canadian imports over what he calls unfair treatment of US firms. The Associated Press is suing the White House after its reporters were banned from the Oval Office and Air Force One for refusing to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. This ban ended a near 100-year tradition. AP is now suing to protect press freedom, calling the ban an attack on the First Amendment. That is unfortunately all we have time for, but we will be back very soon with more of your latest world news.